Okay, hello, good morning. Thank you for making it through this miserable weather. So today we're moving on to Kripke's Naming and Necessity. A very influential book. Most of what it says is nowadays taken for granted as true by most philosophers, which is not usually what happens to even great philosophy books. But let's start out by just reviewing where we got to so far. So Frege had said, the sense of a sign may be the common property of many, and therefore is not a part or mode of the individual mind. Right? That's Frege talking about the objectivity of meaning, that when you and I communicate, we can both be understanding the words we're using in the very same sense as one another. Sense isn't peculiar to any one individual. For one can hardly deny that mankind has a common store of thoughts which is transmitted from one generation to another. Right? That's why language is so, well, one big reason why language is so good, right? That you can have this common store of knowledge being transmitted from one generation to another. Now, Russell was aiming to do without the notion of sense. I mean, we saw there are real difficulties with the notion of sense. But Russell, we left last time, trapped behind a wall of sense data. All that his signs are ultimately talking about is his own sensations, his own sense data. And he has no way of getting out to communicate to other people. The great strength of Russell's picture was that if you're only talking about ultimately about your own sense data, if you're only ultimately thinking about your own sense data, and everything else is a kind of descriptive construct out of your own sense data, then that really explains how, even if it's all a dream, even if none of these people are there, even if this is all an illusion, still you could hold on to your understanding of the meanings of the signs that you're using. But the downside, as we saw, is that on Russell's picture, it really seems like communication is impossible. I can only know about your sense data by description. I can't ever be acquainted with your sense data. So I can't ever be using the signs in the same way you are when we use language, because you're interpreting all the signs in terms of your sense data. I'm interpreting all my signs in terms of my sense data. We don't have a common store of thoughts to transmit. And that's exactly what Frege was warning about, right? You can see, and you know what Frege would say to this? Frege would say, this is what happens to people who don't use the notion of sense, right? What Frege was saying was exactly, you remember this thing about the telescope? The dear old telescope? So the object out there, the moon, is the reference. Then there's the retinal image of the particular observer, and the sense is like the image in the glass in the middle. Well, in Frege's terms, what Russell's done is he's tried to interpret all the signs of language in terms of the retinal image of the observer. And that's lost him the common store of thoughts. Yeah. He needed this middle notion of sense. That would be Frege's diagnosis. Yeah? Is that fair enough? That's okay. So what, can we keep anything? Yes? Sorry, can you give a question? Yeah. Oh, okay. Can we keep anything from Russell? Well, someone suggested last time the analogy with arithmetic, and I think in some ways the analogy with arithmetic is pretty good here. If you think about how arithmetic works, there's a basic class of names in arithmetic. There are the numerals, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right? You need something like that to understand arithmetic at all. You can have lots of definite descriptions in arithmetic. You can talk about the number of the planets, or the number of even primes, or the number of people in this room. There are lots of descriptive ways of talking about numbers. That's all right. You can denote numbers by using descriptions, but ultimately the whole thing wouldn't make sense unless you could in principle say in terms of the numerals which numbers you're talking about. You see what I mean? If you take something like the number of the planets plus the number of moons in the solar system is a prime number, that makes perfect sense. But the only way you really have of checking this out is ultimately to find the numeral that designates the number of the planets, find the numeral that designates the number of moons, add them, and say, find whether that's a prime number. You see what I mean? Arithmetic really depends on having this basic class of names, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. You couldn't do all of arithmetic just in terms of descriptions like that. In fact, you can only interpret those descriptions ultimately because you know that there are these basic numerals. So in arithmetic, just in the face of it anyway, it seems like the numerals are more basic than these uses of descriptions or how many terms, quantifiers. You need to understand the numerals in order to understand the more complex phrases. So Russell's point about the concrete world was that it can't all be descriptions or quantifiers. There has to be a basic class of names. There has to be some analog for the numerals in our talk about the concrete world. That's a very abstract point Russell was making, but it seems pretty powerful. Some of you look very bewildered. Can you pause me? Can you just let me know? Does that all make perfect sense so far? Put your hand up if that makes perfect sense. Okay, put your hand up if you got off the bus a couple of minutes ago. Okay. Okay, let me make the following remark. You can only understand this description that's a description, right? Okay, let's take this bit by bit. This is a descriptive phrase, right? The number of the planets, the number that is the number of the planets. There's exactly one number, which is the number of the planets. Yeah? Okay. You can only understand that description because you know what it would be for that to be, what is it, 8 after poor old Pluto. Pluto's still out, right? So I guess is that right? Is it 8? Yeah. Okay, there you go, 8, right? Okay, so this is like a name of a number, yeah? This is a description referring to a number, yes? Okay, so suppose you're trying to teach a child to use arithmetic. Suppose you said, we're not going to teach you the numerals. We're not going to go 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on. We're just going to teach you descriptions. The number of the planets, the number of people in this room, the number of popsicles on the table, but we're not going to teach you numerals. We're not going to teach you how to count using the numerals. Does your child have a hope of learning arithmetic? Put up your hand if you think your child has a hope. Put up your hand if you think, okay, yes. Can you say a bit more about that? Oh, yes, right. But what I'm suggesting is suppose you don't know the numerals. Right? You belong, let's suppose, to some little-known religious sect that thinks the numerals are sacrilegious, right? So you're not going to have anything to do with the numerals, right? But you do want your child to know arithmetic, right? So you're going to teach your child lots of descriptions like the number of the planets or the number of people in the room or the number of popsicles you had before breakfast or whatever it is, right? Does your child have a hope of learning arithmetic? Put up your hand if you think the answer is yes. Yes?
Couldn't you just put out 5 oranges and say this is 5, this is the number of oranges.
Right, the number of oranges.
This number of oranges plus this number of oranges equals this number of oranges.
You could do that, yeah. But if your child can't translate that into numerals, yeah, then they're not getting a general system here. They know that the number of oranges plus the number of, you just told them that, right? Plus the number of, what was it, plums or something, yeah, is the same as the number of apples, right? You can get them to that. And then you say, but now what about the number of popsicles? Yeah. What you've taught them has no bearing on that. Yeah. If you know there's this general thing, 5 or 8 or whatever it is, that the number of popsicles that can be used to identify both the number of popsicles and the number of, I'm sorry, I keep losing track of the example, oranges, right? Then then your child can get up and running. Yeah? But if you don't have the numerals, you have no way of making these connections across all the descriptions. Yeah? Yeah?
It doesn't have to be a note, it can be with anything color. It just has to be some name.
Some name. Right, that's right. Right, that's right. It needn't be our numerals, it might be Roman numerals, it might be something else. But you need something systematic to get arithmetic. Yeah? Or at any rate, that's how it seems to work. Put up your hand if you're still on the bus. It's better. I mean, if you're following me, if that all makes sense. Okay, well, that is by no means unanimous. Is it clear what I'm saying, even if you don't see why I'm saying it? Put up your hand if it's pretty clear what I'm saying. Okay. So there's a base class of numerals, that's the claim. And everything else in arithmetic is interpreted in terms of the numerals. Right. That's the claim, anyhow. So after that helpful analogy, Russell's claim is that for your ordinary talk about the concrete world, there's got to be a base class of names in terms of which quantifiers and descriptions are understood. If you think of it in terms of formal logic, it can't all be X's and predicates. There have to be some names in the system somewhere. Okay. So then, if names are more basic than descriptions, there must be something fixing the reference of a name that's not a description. I really can't tell whether this is too obvious for words and you can't see why I'm saying it, or if you can't see why I'm saying it because it doesn't make an ounce of sense. Okay, if you've got a base class of names, like numerals, that aren't defined in terms of descriptions, then there must be some other way in which that base class is connecting to the objects, otherwise than by means of descriptions. And Russell's answer for what it is with the concrete world is that it's acquaintance. This kind of immediate, intuitive contact with your own sense data. Okay? And how he gets down the garden path? Well, since he's doing without sense, he doesn't want to allow for the possibility of informative identities involving basic names or the possibility of meaning without reference for basic names. But that's what gets him trapped, right? That last step is what gets him trapped. You could keep the idea that there's a basic class of names without saying you can only talk about sense data in terms of the names. That would be pretty appealing. Okay? So that, I think, is where we are. We're at this kind of cliff-hanging point with Russell trapped behind a wall of sense data. Can we extricate him? Is he doomed to stay there? How can you get him out? There's plenty of chairs. There's plenty of chairs. There's plenty of chairs. Can we get him out, class? What's it got? How would you get him out? Is it hopeless? Poor old Russell. Yes? Thank God, yes. Right.
Did you say that this and that refer to material objects?
This and that refer to material objects. Yeah, that's what you want. You want your basic names to refer to material objects, right? That's the first thing you've got to do to get out, because then you and I can be having as our base class of names, names that all talk about the same things. But the puzzle for Russell is how you're going to get that, given these puzzles about informativeness and meaning without reference. Because the minute you're talking about physical objects, it seems like you can have informative identities, or you can think there's an object there, but there'll be no object there, and so have meaning without reference. Yeah, that's the basic block. But I agree, that's got to be the right answer. Yeah, we've got to get him. That's what getting him out would look like. Yeah, so we need a plan. Do we have a plan? There's a chair over there. Yep. Sorry?
Guess and check.
Guess and check?
So, I mean this, and then eventually you'll figure it out.
I don't wish to see, I don't wish to seem unintelligent, but I don't understand. Can you do that again?
So if I try to express something, I try and communicate by saying this or using.
Oh, I see. Yes, right.
If you don't provide a reaction, my sense data doesn't interpret your reaction as what I expect it to be, then I change what I'm saying.
Right. Very good. Okay. But how does that help us? I mean, just spell this out for me. If I'm talking about my own sense data, you can try guess and check, right? If I give a reaction you don't expect, then you can try something else. But the trouble with my own sense data is that they're fundamentally unknown to you, yeah? So guess and check as much as you like. You're never going to have the first idea what I'm talking about, yeah? So it's got to be the same strategy that we're talking about physical objects, yeah? But how would guess and check? Guess and check will let you, guess and check might get us communication, yeah? But it's not going to explain how there can be informativeness or meaning without reference. Yeah, guess and check, yeah, okay, I see what you're saying. Guess and check will really help with you figuring out which object I'm talking about in the case when there is an object, yeah? That's what you mean, that's what you're thinking, yeah. And that's good, that's right. But it's not going to tell us how there can be informative identities. What's different between two signs referring to the same physical object when the identity is informative? I don't say, yeah, sorry? Yeah, we're not. Yeah, guess and check is a good idea, but it doesn't address quite that question. Yeah, I think. Okay, your neighbour had give a question. Come. Okay. Oh. Okay. Well, on this cliff-hanging point, we move to a different part of the forest. Kripke gives a way of addressing this, which we'll come to on Monday. But right now, I want to look at what's maybe the most technical idea in his piece. And I just want to take some time to lay out what rigid designation is. I take it most of you looked at what about the stuff at rigid designation. Was it plain enough? Put up your hand if it was plain enough. Okay. you encourage me in proceeding here, right? I hope by the end of today it will be plain enough to everyone. Okay, it's actually a very simple idea, but it's extremely powerful. So let's just take some time to lay this out. The first thing is there's a distinction between two ways of talking about what's possible. So let's just get a piece out here. Sometimes when we're talking about what's possible or what might be or what could be, you're talking about what could be so far as you know. Yeah? And sometimes you're talking about the things themselves out there and the way they could have been, something that's got nothing much to do with your knowledge of it. So suppose, for example, I come cycling in and you sweep up in your fancy car and I think, my God, you nearly knocked me off my bike. Right? That can happen. Yeah? I can be really indignant. I could say, you nearly got me there. And so on. Then it's not that I'm thinking, well, maybe you did knock me off my bike. You see what I mean? It's not that I'm thinking, hey, maybe you did actually knock me off my bike. I'm not saying, for all I know, you did knock me off my bike. I'm just saying it could easily have happened that you knocked me off my bike. And you could reply, I was nowhere near you. I was over a yard away from you. You were in no danger at all, right? So there we're arguing about a possible world. We're arguing about what could be, what might have been, yeah, what could easily have happened. And that's a real issue. But it doesn't have to do with what might be so given our current knowledge. If a policeman in a murder investigation, if a detective in a murder investigation looks at one of the suspects and says, he could be our man, that is to do with current knowledge. That says, given all the evidence we have, given all the clues we've got, this could be the guy who did it, right? That says, for all we know, that's the murderer. Yeah. So that one's about knowledge. That has to do with what might be so, given your current knowledge. Yep.
I don't really understand how the first case is independent of knowledge. Like, I mean, you can't say, oh, you nearly knocked me off my bike if you're a mile away.
If you're a mile away.
Like, you're still dependent on the fact that you know where you are and you know where the other person is and like you know that you're on a bike.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, you can. Yeah, there is such a thing as knowing the possibility, if you see what I mean. But sometimes possibility means my current knowledge doesn't rule out that it's so. Yeah, that's what's going on here. Our current knowledge doesn't rule out that he's the murderer. Yeah. In the case that where I say you could have knocked me off my bike, I'm not saying my current knowledge doesn't rule it out that you did knock me off my bike. Yeah. But you're right, there's got to be a basis for making the claim. Look, let me give another example. Suppose you're trying to sign up for a class, and the computer system is so complex, it's late at night, you've been doing this all day, you're kind of bamboozled by the system, you click buttons for a bit, and you say, God, I don't know what's going on here, I might be in astrophysics. Yes? Right? Something went terribly wrong there, and I might be in astrophysics. Yep. That's one thing. That's saying, for all I know, I'm in astrophysics. You see what I mean? Yeah. Here's another thing that might happen. Suppose that you find yourself sitting in a theory of meaning class and thinking, my God, was this a mistake? I could have signed up for astrophysics, right? I could be sitting in an astrophysics class right now. If you're thinking that, it's not that you're thinking, hey, maybe I am in an astrophysics class right now. You see what I mean? That's what's so poignant about the situation. Yeah? If you're thinking, if only I had bunked off and driven down the coast, I could be sitting in the sunshine on a beach right now instead of toiling through the rain. Yeah? It's not that you're saying to yourself, well, maybe I am sitting on a beach in the sunshine right now. Yeah? The situation would not be so difficult. Yeah? So things like negligence and safety and risk have to do with metaphysical possibility, with this kind of possibility that isn't really grounded in what you know. If you say that was really dangerous, what happened with that nuclear reactor, at any point in the last 10 years, that could have gone off and killed thousands of people. Yeah? That was really dangerous. That was really negligent. You're not talking about what might have happened for all you know, because you know perfectly well that didn't happen. You're just saying it could easily have happened. I mean, these two kinds of possibility have different emotions associated with them. For example, if you're afraid that something's about to happen, what you're saying is, for all I know, that thing is going to get me, that thing is going to happen. For all I know, that might be. If you're hopeful about something, you're saying, for all I know, that still might happen. But things like regret or relief, anger or wistfulness, if I'm relieved that I didn't go over that cliff, it's, I could have gone over that cliff, but I didn't. That's why I'm relieved. Whereas if I'm afraid I have gone over the cliff, I'm saying, for all I know, that's what's happening. Does that make sense, Professor? Yes. Okay. So the way is usually put in the literature, the way Kripke talks and the way people usually talk about this is that, well, here are some new friends. Here are the possible worlds, right? As you can see, possible worlds are kind of round and blue. And this is only a fragment. There are quite a lot of possible worlds, yeah? But there are, and some of them are closer to the actual world than others. You can see that, right? And one of them is special. Can you guess what the A stands for? Actual, very good, yes, right. Okay, so this is the actual world where we all live, right? And these are other possible worlds. Now, this is, for example, the world in which you did not knock me off my bike, or the world in which that reactor did blow up. Yeah? This has nothing to do with my knowledge. These are kind of all objectively out there. And for example, if you and I are arguing about whether you nearly did knock me off my bike, what I'm saying is that world in which you knock me off, in which you do knock me off my bike, that's really close to this world. And you're saying nonsense is miles away, is right out here. You see what I mean? And this way of putting it makes it seem like a philosopher's fantasy. But the thing about that kind of example is it's completely real when people argue about that. You might have a court case about that kind of thing. Yeah, you nearly did do that. Yeah, people could be sued on the basis of which possible world is close and which one is far away. Yeah. So, although this is the best way to think about it, this is a picture to have in your head, but it is actually grounded in things that matter to us very much in everyday life. Yeah, regret or relief have to do with what's going on in all these other possible worlds. Yep. Okay. So this is the notion of possibility that we really want in discussing Kripke. This notion of what could have been. Yep. So in these terms, how would you define necessary? Frege talked about a proposition being necessary or contingent. Necessary?
True in all possible worlds.
Very good. There you go. True in all metaphysically possible worlds. Yeah. So if you take 2 plus 2 is 4, yeah, is there a possible world in which that's false? No, there is no possible world in which that's false. How could that be? 2 plus 2 not be 4? A world in which you took astrophysics? All too poignantly, yes, right. You could have done that. If you feel regret or relief, boy, I really lucked out. I might have got into astrophysics, right? If you feel regret or relief about that, that's saying, here am I in this other world, sitting in an astrophysics class. Here am I in this other world, having bunked off for the day down the coast at a beach. I'm not trying to plant ideas in your head here. But you see what I mean? We talk about these the whole time. Necessary means it's true in all possible worlds. Being in this class right now is not necessary. Yeah? Because there are all these other possibilities. 2 plus 2 is 4. Well, it's hard to see how that could not be. Yeah? It seems like that's going to be true in every possible world. So if something's necessary, must it be a priori? A priori means you can tell it's true without looking. Right? You just need to reflect. Something like that. So if it's necessary, must it be a priori? Can we take a vote on that? If it's necessary, must it be a priori? What do you think? Yes? I mean, that's certainly what Frege seems to have thought. Actually, no, it's not what Frege. I take that back. Many philosophers have thought that. Okay. I mean, if you think it could be perfectly well be necessary without being a priori. 1? Okay. The argument that if it's necessary, it's got to be a priori is, and if it's a priori, it's got to be necessary. That's pretty easy to see. I mean, a priori means you can tell without looking, right? Contingent means there are some possible worlds in which it's false. Okay. Are you raising a question? Okay, yes.
What about water equals to H2O?
Water equals H2O. What about it?
It's not a priori.
It's not a priori.
I think
You think it's necessary? Yeah.
it's
Well, if it's necessary, then it must be true in every possible world, right? So why would you need to look in order to find out whether it's true? Put it around the other way. The only reason you need to look around you is to find out which world's the actual world. Yeah? To check that you're in one world rather than another. That's why your senses are so handy, right? They tell you what's going on in the actual world as opposed to any other world. So if something's contingent, if there's some world in which it's false, how could you know without looking that that's not the world you're in? You see what I mean? No? Well, what good are your senses? A priori means you don't need to use your senses. Right? So, in terms of this kind of picture, what do your senses do for you? Excuse me. Sorry, carry on.
I thought that was just nice conception, but water equals, I know it because of the experiment.
Because of experience and experiments, that's right, yeah. But if it's true in every single possible world, how come you need to do experiments? Experiments just tell you what's going on in the actual world.
So you think there is a possible world out there where water does not equal H2O?
Well, suppose there isn't, right? Suppose there's no possible world in which water does not equal H2O. Why would you need to use your senses and do experiments in order to find out whether water is H2O? But what were you ignorant of? You were ignorant of which about the actual world.
Out there, it's just that I didn't know about it before. So I need to do this hypothesis and conduct this.
That's right. That's to say, there's a possible world in which water is not H2O. And you've got to rule that one out. But if that isn't so, then how come you're needing to do this? What you're thinking there, I think, is actually basically right. I just want to say why it's so hard to see how what you're saying can be right. Yeah? Sorry? A twin Earth argument. Uh-huh.
Something basically has because the Earth is basically identical to our actual one, but the water is not H2O.
Sorry, can you do that louder?
Yeah, sorry. Twin Earth argument.
Yeah.
Basically, there are two Earths. There's another Earth that basically is identical to ours, except for the fact that water.
Right, there could be another Earth where water looks just like our stuff, but it's not.
A person from the actual Earth goes to this.
Right.
And most people can tell, like the meaning that it would be
Right.
they're referring to.
Okay. So you don't know whether you're an Earth or twin Earth. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you've got to find out which world is the actual one. Yeah. But that's to say there's a world out there where you're in twin Earth. Yeah. And water is not H2O. Uh-huh. Right, so it's contingent. Yeah. Okay, we'll come back to this many times, this dialogue. I think ultimately you guys are in the right, yeah? But I want to be very clear about why it's hard to see this. So, necessary, if it's necessary, it's got to be a priori. Is that right? All right. Well, one more piece. Talking about possible worlds is always just a vivid way of talking about counterfactuals. By counterfactuals, I mean statements like, if Germany had won the Second World War, then, and you can go on and speculate about that, if only I'd brought my umbrella, then, yeah. You're talking about what's happening in some other possible world. These counterfactuals are completely real, right? We argue and reason in terms of them the whole time. Yeah. So that's really what we're talking about when we talk about possible worlds. If you say if Al Gore had been president of the US in 2001, then, well, you know, we'd still have had a terrible economic collapse, or we'd never have got into this thing in Iraq, or, you know, people argue about that kind of remark, yeah? If Al Gore had been the president in 2001, yeah?
I guess just relating to this one,
Yeah.
So suppose it's necessary for you to take an ethics class when you graduate.
It's necessary to take an ethics class to graduate, yes, right?
So, but you can postulate that there exists a world where that's not actually necessary. You don't-
Absolutely, yes, yes.
So is that, so I'm not sure this, if there are, even though it's necessary in this particular world.
Right. Necessary, very often in ordinary talk, when we say necessary, we mean necessary so far as something or other is concerned. Yeah? So you mean necessary so far as the current graduation requirements are concerned, yeah? That's not really what we're talking about here. When I say 2 plus 2 is 4, that's not just necessary so far as something is concerned. That's just absolutely necessary. You can say what you like. You could change the graduation requirements as much as you like, but 2 plus 2 is still going to be 4, yeah? But of course, you might not need to take the ethics class, yeah? So that's, how should I say, that's a local condition, current graduation requirements, that could be varied. But here, I mean, this is just a fragment of logical space, right? I'm only showing you a small part of the picture here because it's really big, right, logical space. There are lots of these worlds. And when you say something is necessary, you're saying it's true in absolutely all of them. Yeah? Okay. Now, these counterfactuals, when you talk about if Al Gore had been president of the US in 2001, are you talking about metaphysical possibility or possibility that just has to do with so far as I know? Well, the answer is on the screen. You're talking about metaphysical possibility, right? Because you're not saying, well, maybe Al did win in 2001. You're saying, well, if Al had won in 2001, yeah? You're not saying maybe he did, for all I know. You're saying, I know perfectly well he didn't, but if he had won, yeah? Okay, so now follow me very closely here. What's going on when you say, suppose Al won in 2001? What's happening? You're describing a possible world in which Al is president of the US in 2001, and then you're seeing what happens in that world, right? So here we are, we're saying, this is the actual world where Al doesn't win. Here is the other world where Al does win, and let's see what goes on in that world. So this is the world where Al is the president in 2001. Yes? And then we see, does the US invade Iraq? Is there an economic collapse? Does the law and order break down completely? What goes on here? Sorry?
Does the Patriot Act get written before?
Does the Patriot Act get written? Very good. Anything else? Okay, so you just work through and see what happens in this world when you're saying Gore is president. You're saying in this world it's true that Gore is president in 2001, and then you work through and see what happens there. So you're describing a world in which Gore is president. So you get two terms that are singling out an object here. You get Al Gore, and you got the president of the US in 2001. Is Al Gore a name? Yes. Is the president of the US in 2001 a name or a description? A description, very good. That was rewarding. Okay, right. So we're considering a particular world here in which Gore is president in 2001. Now, when we're talking about that world, does Gore refer to the same person in that world as it does in the actual world? Well, we're talking about this, this guy, Al, right? And we're saying about him, he could have won in 2001. Yeah? So when we're talking here, we're talking about the same man, the same person. Yes, of course we're talking about the same person, for heaven's sake. I mean, if Al is sitting by the fire thinking, I could have won, that was a fix, right? It would all have been better if I'd won. Yeah? He's not saying somebody else might have won. You see what I mean? That's what's so heartrending about the whole situation, is him, that very person that could have won. Yeah? So when we're talking here, we're saying Gore is the president in 2000. If Gore had been the president in 2001, Gore is picking out the very same person in this world as it does in the actual world. Yeah? It's saying his life could have been different. If you're in the evening sitting there with your broken dreams, saying, I could have done this, or I could have done that, yeah? Or someone else is saying of you, he could have done this, he could have done that, yeah? Sorry, I need to pause a second. Right. Then you're talking about the same person. across these different worlds, yeah? Seeing where that person got up to in all these different worlds. And you're using that name to pick out the person you're talking about, having all these different things happen to them, yeah? But consider this world in which Gore is the president in 2001. Now here's the description, the president in 2001. The president in 2001, that designates a particular person in the actual world. Who does it designate in the actual world? George Bush. Who does it designate in this world? Al Gore. So does it designate the same person in the actual world as it does in this world? No, it designates a different person in this world than it does in this world. So watch this very closely. We're describing a world in which Gore is president. So in that world, Al Gore refers to the same thing as it does in this world. That's all right? And the president of the USA in 2001 refers to a different person, denotes a different person in this world than it does in the actual world. So when we're talking about that world, Al Gore refers to just the same person in that world as it does in this world. Yeah? So that's not something specific about this particular example. If we are looking at Al and saying, Al could have been anything, thinker, dreamer, poet, Al could have been a great musician, yeah? You talk about all these different possible worlds. You say, Al could have, might have been, right? Then are we always talking about the same person across all these different possible worlds? Yes, of course we are. That's what the name does for you. It grabs onto a particular object and it lets you talk about that object across lots of different possibilities. But the president of the US, there are lots of different possible worlds where that is designating a different person. That is denoting a different person. Yeah? So you can think of it like this. A description specifies a kind of role that someone can fill, right? I'll be your president in this world, right? If you see what I mean. Yeah? It's kind of like I'll be your waiter tonight. That's a role that one person takes on, but lots of different people could have filled it. So a description generally, the King of France, the author of Waverley, these are roles that one person takes on, but different people could have had. The tallest person in the room, maybe that's your role right now, but there's another possible world in which someone else was in the class and they were the tallest. You see what I mean? So what we're using names for is, you use a name to keep track of the same object across lots of different possible situations. You say Al, and you've locked onto that one thing, and you now talk about what he could have been and what he could have done in all these different situations. But a description is identifying a general role that lots of different people could fill in different possible situations. Yes?
So names are necessary, not theory, and descriptions are not.
That is close, but not quite on the mark. That is very close, yeah. But this is the way Kripke puts it is to say names are rigid, yeah. See, necessary and a priori are terms that apply to sentences, yeah. Is a name a sentence? Nope. So necessary, so it doesn't really work, right? But what you're thinking there is completely right. But the term you want is rigid, yeah. Which brings me on to the next point. So Kripke says, let's call something a rigid designator if in every possible world it designates the same object. Yep?
Couldn't there usually be another possible world where you have a different name?
Where you have a different name, that's right. What we need is something like, so long as you hold constant the meaning of the sign, right, then you're always referring to the same thing. Yeah? If you talk about me, you could say Campbell could have had a different name, right? Campbell could have been called Rumpelstiltskin, right? Then that's possible, right? But what you're doing there is you are using the name Campbell to specify me in a different world. Yet you right now here, using the name or talking about a different world, but you're using the name Campbell to keep track of me across these worlds. Yeah. So when we use it, that's what you wanted, right? When is that right? When you use the sign to specify a possible world, when you're saying what Campbell could have done or what Gore could have done, you're specifying the same object, whatever world you're talking about. Yeah, that's what rigidity is. Does that catch what you had out after? Okay. Can you think of any examples of rigid designators? Yes?
Just to follow up, so you're saying the sign doesn't matter, it's the object, it's the reference that needs to be consistent, right?
It's both. It's that the sign, when you're talking about any other possibility, the sign is always picking out the same object.
Same, yeah, but I mean, like, I could call you Campbell, somebody else could call you John.
Right.
Could call you Sam.
Right. Whichever term you're using, you're always picking out the same object when you talk about different possibilities. Yeah. Is it?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Sun,
The sun, very good. Yes. Right. Right. Excellent. Any other examples? Yes? Numerals. Yeah. Numerals are surely rigid. Yep. Look, any proper name, any ordinary name is going to be like this, right? Al Gore, the Sun, George W. Bush. I don't know. Are there other names? California. Yeah. Sorry? Columbia. Yeah, Columbia will do. You've got to make up your mind which Columbia you're talking about. That's true. But whichever one you're talking about, when you say what could have happened to it, you're always talking about the same one and different possibilities, right? So Al Gore is going to be a rigid designator. Yeah? If you got that, you've really broken the back of Kripke's article. I mean, what I mean is that you've done the hard bit. Yeah? Now suppose you've just got exactly one object, which is, let's say, the youngest person in the room. And so you've got the definite description, VF, that designates that object, the youngest person in the room. Is that going to designate the same object in different possible worlds? Put up your hand if you think the answer is yes. And if you think the answer is no. And if you have no idea what the question means. Okay, one or two. Okay. Sorry?
Could you repeat the question?
Yeah. So what I hope we were agreeing was when you talk about Al in different possibilities, that sign is always locking onto the same object and talking about it across different possible worlds. But when you talk about the F, the youngest person in the room, the president of the US, across different possibilities, are you always designating the same thing? Okay, very good. Of course not, right? I mean, somebody else could have been president. Somebody else could have been the youngest person in the room. Yeah? Somebody else could have been the richest person in the room. The poorest. Yeah? Whatever. Yes? So, if you take the president of the US in 2001, is that a rigid designator? Put up your hand if you think the answer is yes. Did you give a question? Yeah?
You go back to slide.
Yes. Some questions I know the answer to, right? Yes, I can go back a slide.
So, if we took F to be a system of descriptors that were so specific that they could only pick out one object from a possible world,
What kind of thing would that be?
if we were just to create some infinite description set
Uh-huh.
or near infinite, so specific that it would pick out
Yeah.
one object that would be designated.
You could probably get the effect you want, I agree. You could get something that, you could get a sign that, as it were, was kind of accidentally rigid. Like with a name, the whole function of the name is to pick out the object to let you keep track of it across different worlds. With a descriptor, it wouldn't be so much the complexity of the description, because suppose you take some very complex description, that might fit you in this world, but in another possible world, someone else fits that description. Yeah? But there might be things like the number 2 might be an example. 2 is a property of being between 1 and 3, right? If you say the number between 1 and 3, that's a description, but probably that picks out the same thing in every possible world, namely the number 2. Yeah. So I think you could get the effect you want. In that case, it's kind of an accident that it's rigid, if you see what I mean.
Okay.
Yep. Yep.
So can that be rigid?
That.
If I say that, like,
That's very good. Yes.
this desk, in all possible worlds, this refers to the same desk. I mean,
That's great. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. If I point to Al and I say that man could have been president, yeah, it works just the same way as I was saying Al did. It grabs onto the object and talks about it in different possible situations. Yeah. So I agree. That's a great point. This and that probably work pretty much the way names do here. Yeah, they're rigid too. Yeah. So is that okay? There was someone else. Okay. Actually, we're a little bit over time, but let me just get to the main point here. So definite descriptions are not rigid. I mean, Kripke, I think, doesn't talk about flexibility, but the natural thing to oppose to rigidity is flexibility. Descriptions denote different objects in different possible worlds. Now, the description theory of names said Aristotle means something like the last great philosopher of antiquity. Yeah? Names just mean the same things as descriptions. But if Aristotle refers to the same thing in every possible world, and the last great philosopher of antiquity designates different things in different possible worlds, does the name mean the same as a description? No, it does not mean the same thing as a description. So?
Destroyed meaning.
Kripke's destroyed. Well, yes. I'm not sure about the glee there, but what you mean is right. Yeah, he's destroyed the idea that you can give a descriptive meaning to names, right? That's what it seems like, anyway. Name refers to the same thing in every world. The descriptions designate different things in different possible worlds. Therefore, the name doesn't have the same meaning in all worlds. So we don't want this picture. We need this picture, yeah, where the name just gloms onto the thing and hangs onto it. But now just think about a proposition like Hesperus is Phosphorus. Your homework is, if the sign Hesperus is rigid and the sign Phosphorus is rigid, then must the identity statement Hesperus is Phosphorus be necessary, or could it be contingent? Brood on that, and we'll talk again on Monday. Okay.